While my 1963 Thunderbird and my dad's 1981 Mustang have been the main focus of my restoration efforts, when I get free time, I still like to go out and do some work on my 1964 Thunderbird, which has patiently been awaiting its restoration in the backyard. One thing on this car has been driving me crazy is the hood, which had a patchwork of different paint jobs on it and a lot of surface rust. Today, I'll be tackling this hood and getting it into a fresh coat of epoxy.
Work on the hood would begin by brushing on a thick coat of aircraft remover paint stripper to the old paint. This hood had received two paint jobs in its life, first being painted yellow when it left the factory, and then eventually being repainted red later in its life. In my possession, the hood also got a third color, some John Deere green from my tractor. I don't remember what I painted on here, or why exactly I thought this hood would make a good paint bench, but either way, I was hoping this aircraft stripper would help me out. In only a few minutes, the paint stripper was already causing much of the old paint to blister up. I left the hood for 30 minutes, and once I came back, just about all the paint on this hood had been decimated. Now was a fun job of scraping up as much of the old paint as I could and throwing it away. I did a final clean using a pressure washer to blast off any leftover paint stripper and loose paint remaining. Pressure washers are one of those tools you don't use much during restorations, but I tell you what, when you do need them, they are absolute lifesavers. After letting the hood dry out, I was left with lots of clean steel where all the old paint used to be. There was still a few small patches of paint here and there, but those would be taken care of in the next step. To remove all the remaining paint and surface rust, I turned to a surface conditioning tool. Using a 40 grit silicone carbide drum, I set the tool at its highest speed and began slowly working my way around the hood. The 40 grit drum worked great at getting a majority of this hood down to bare steel while also leaving a perfect surface for the primer to bond to. One thing this drum struggled with, though, was getting to some of the deeper rust pits. Given the hard nature of silicone carbide, this wasn't a huge surprise. So I switched out to a 120 grit drum, which is made with a fiber material similar to Scotch-Brite and has sandpaper interwoven into the fibers. Using this new drum, I went over some of the more pitted areas on this hood and cleaned them out. I also took the opportunity with this drum to clean up the edges of the hood. The edges of body panels can easily be forgotten about due to their small nature, but they are just as important because any primer that fails to stick here will lead to rust in the future, and nobody wants that. One of the areas the surface conditioning tool failed to reach was the inside radius where the center of the hood rises up. For this, I turned to a small handheld sander. Using a 3-inch twist lock, or sometimes referred to as roll lock, surface conditioning disc, I began clearing all the remaining paint and rust from this radius. The last area that needed to be cleaned was the section of hood where the hood scoop goes. Given all the contours in this area, the only effective way to remove all the rust and paint here, short of sandblasting it, was to use a wire wheel. Using a steel crimped wire wheel brush and a drill, the wire wheel wasted no time clearing off this area. I then went over the radius one final time with the wire wheel to ensure everything had been removed. And once that was done, I was ready to solvent clean this hood. I first went over the hood with acetone and some shop towels, which did a great job removing a majority of the gunk. I then went over the hood again with a lint-free solvent wipe until the steel was perfectly clean. With the hood all clean now, I was ready for some primer. My primer of choice is Tamco Epoxy Primer, which is some of the best primer hands down. This primer has been used on my John Deere, Thunderbird, and my dad's Mustang, and every single time it lays down beautifully and is super tough. Likewise, I always use this Spectrum HTE Black Widow paint gun from Harbor Freight, which does an excellent job laying down this primer. I first gently, or aggressively I guess, shake up the paint can. I then cleaned up the paint gun and mixing cup with acetone, poured in equal parts epoxy and hardener, stirred it up, and then poured the epoxy into my paint gun. And just like that, it was time to lay down the first coat of primer. After about a 20-minute wait, I came back out and laid down the second coat of primer. Finally, after a few hours worth of work, this hood went from being an ugly eyesore to being primed and protected. There is still some body work on here that needs to be tackled before the hood can go back into its original color of gunmetal gray, but for now, this epoxy will serve as a good protective layer against rust and will give me a good head start for when I start work on this hood again. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.